when I refer to you, what's the best name to use?
Jess, this is a long story, but the short version is my mother is first generation American, and she was living in the South, my parents were, and she was hearing all these fancy Southern names like J. Thomas Smithton III. And so she's like, well, I'm going to name my kid something fancy too. I'm going to call him L. David. Maybe mom didn't know at that point was J. Thomas is actually John Thomas. He just goes by JT or something. And so I just got the L period. There's no word there. There's no name there. It's just an L. Technically, though, courtesy of the United States Navy, they informed me that on my birth certificate, when they actually pulled it up and said to me, no, your first name is actually L period. Your middle name is David. And your last name is Kingsley. Technically, by the Commonwealth of Virginia, my first name is just L.
L period.
People call me LDK, LD, L dot, you name it. I get lots of names.
Amazing. Oh, I'm so glad I asked.
I feel like we ought to include that in the pod. We've started recording. David, you and I have known each other for a couple of years, largely through the people leader in HR communities here in the Bay Area, but more recently through a outcropping of Founders Circle Capital. There's a group of HR leaders that they maintained for a while that People Leader Accelerator started supporting. And that was really wonderful to get to know you a little bit better. I'd love for you, if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about yourself and your career journey with our listeners that don't know you yet.
Yeah, sure. You bet. First and most importantly, I am the husband and spouse to my wife, Erin, and the father and coach and beneficiary of the amazing 3 little children that we have in our house, Jack, who is 7, Kate, who is 6, and Maddie, who is 3. And that's really the most important thing you need to know about me. And that's my identity. And that's who I am and what I mean to the world. I happen to be a chief people officer for my day job that helps to pay the mortgage. At the same time, though, I think helps me to make sure that I'm aligned to what I think I was put on this earth to do. And that is to help other people up the mountain. Full stop. I was here to be of service. I was raised that way from a young age, just in my family, kind of the orientation that we have as a family unit. And so I started my career, interestingly enough, in consulting. So that was how I started to be of service to clients and customers in management consulting. So I started my career with Anderson Consulting, that then, of course, rebranded to Accenture, spent a couple of years at Booz Allen, then back to Accenture. So the first 13 years of my career was in management consulting. And I did organization change management. That was the part of the practice I was in. I was in the PeopleSoft practice, and then I was in the Salesforce practice in consulting. After those first 13 years, kind of chapter 1 of my career, I got recruited over to Salesforce itself. And they called me and they said, we want to talk to you about this job in employee success. I said, what's that? And they said, well, it's what we call HR. And I said, I'm sure with my nose very high in the air, well, I'm not an HR person, I'm a consultant. And I said, are you looking for some consulting services? I'm happy to sell you those as I make my partner case inside the firm. And they said, no, we want to talk to you about this job leading the HR business partner team for sales. I was interested in that. And what I thought about was, what do I really love doing? And I love working with clients. I love talking with clients about how do you keep the lights on, like here in my office, that go out automatically if you're not moving around. So I thought to myself, what do I really love about my job? And I love working with leaders. I love working with employees, and I love helping people connect why they're here on this earth, what they believe about their own journey, with how do they deploy that in practical reality terms. And so that led me to the HR business partner world for a number of years in Salesforce. I subsequently supported the technology and product organization at Salesforce as a business partner. Then I moved over to lead strategy and operations for the company from a people standpoint, at which point I was picked up by MuleSoft to be their first chief people officer in that organization. We had just gone public. The ink was still wet on the S1. And then not too long after that, we were acquired ourselves actually by Salesforce. And then I kind of moved into what is now the startup scale-up ecosystem, where I've spent the last number of years of my career in a sweet spot that is really, call it 500 to, 5 or 10,000 people, helping organizations scale and grow with most of the time founder CEOs who are still very much part of the business. And I really love working with.
I love how you said that. It was not that interesting of a career. And I think you have both of us being like, oh my gosh, like the breadth and the depth that you bring to the table is just.
Yeah, I appreciate that. In the middle of that journey, stuck in the middle of it randomly, I was also 8 years as a Navy Reserve intelligence officer. So I was in the Navy, wearing the uniform for 8 years in that force. And I was doing that concurrently with my civilian jobs, which certainly helped to sharpen my focus about the mission that these companies are on. Certainly the one that I'm in now, Illumio, a cybersecurity company, helping to stop the spread of breaches. So I've always been sort of mission oriented about what is this organization? What is this company trying to do? How's it trying to help? How's it trying to be of service to customers, stakeholders, shareholders, you name it? That's a big fundamental underpinning of how I decide. And fortunately, I'm blessed to be at a point in my career, how I decide where I get to spend my time and the people with whom I try and associate.
You mentioned you did consulting for many years, and then you started to get into the people space and were doing PeopleSoft integrations at one point in your career.
Yeah.
At a time when a lot of change was happening. Technology was in a fundamental shift with the internet coming in. I'd love to hear more about what you learned from that time with change. And then given we are in another pretty significant technological shift, what are the things that you think are similar and what are things that are maybe quite different in this time of change that you're encountering, especially in organizations like Illumio?
So yes, as you mentioned, I started out in the PeopleSoft practice, and I'll date myself a little bit. Back in the day, we were on a 2-tier system where it was code on client. So when we were loading PeopleSoft onto the client's machines, which were, desktop machines where it used to be like 33 megahertz, little sign running, the little blinking green thing on the front, we'd have to load a disk at the top, or CD-ROM at that time, onto the machine with the load code on there and deploy it that way. Then we moved into kind of a 3-tier architecture where we got more into the web services world. But I was a part of that transition. And I remember when we were working with clients, they were going through a time of fundamental change in their business. Whereas before, the pace of change was incremental. And all of a sudden, the pervasive nature of the internet in business and the architecture of SaaS that was just literally coming onto the fore was there. And all of a sudden, much more was expected of these people. They were expected to work faster. They were expected to have access to more data. They were expected to evolve more quickly. And so I was put right into the center of the storm as a change management person who was working with clients, many of whom had worked in a certain way. We're thinking like COBOL and Fortran days for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And all of a sudden, here comes the consultants with our little internet machines, and we're rocking their world. It got me really oriented very early on in my career to be sensitive to the change journey that people go on when technology is introduced. Just to answer your question more directly, I don't think that has changed at all today. If we look at the advent of AI and just in the last, 6-9 months, how much of our world is different. The nature of change management and change adaptation has not changed. The pace at which we're doing it has gone to 11. We are cranked, right? I heard a podcast with a professor the other day, and he was saying that he doesn't finish his lecture notes for his class until the morning of the class when they're on an AI module, because if he finishes them the day before, he's already outdated by the morning time. Like literally, you got to watch the overnights to see what happened last night in the overseas markets, you name it, to be current. So the pace has greatly accelerated. Now, I'll take a page from our anthropologists, I think. The human brain physiologically has not changed in, something like 100 million years or some long time. Like our brains are pretty much what they were a long, long time ago as they are today. However, the world in which we interact has massively shifted, and we are not equipped to deal with this naturally. It's just like our brains have these patterns, these heuristics that we use to make sense of the world, and all of a sudden the world is changing at such a rapid pace. And so it brings it back to, I think, where is the people function in organizations today? What are we called to do? We're called to be of service to humans, people who are going through a massive shift at a pace that we've never before seen. But the reality is so much of our industry is going to change. If we can spend our time working with our clients, again, back to that human to human connection of making sense of this journey, how has the nature of work changed? How do I make sense of my world, my career, my contributions? That's a role that I don't think is going to be easily replaced by AI. Humans still want to have a human interaction. We all want to connect with each other. That's just wired into the human nature of us, despite the fact that we now have these great tools that we can use to accelerate our work. And so how do we as people facilitate that human connection in a way that helps people make manifest, to borrow a line from Aristotle, what is their telos, their teleology? What are we destined to be? What are we meant to be on this earth? That's what the HR teams are supposed to do. Our job is not to carry the clipboard around and count the noses anymore. Maybe it never was, but it certainly is not today. So it's shifted radically, both on the client side and for those of us in the people business.
I really love how you talk about being of service and helping others to summit the mountain. In our field of human resources, often it attracts a lot of professionals that want to help others, that have that innate service mentality. Now, often that leads to, I guess, a bifurcation of I'm the advocate of the employees. I'm almost a union steward to an extent for those folks that know like how that works. And then other HR leaders are really focused on business outcomes, help your organization grow and meet its goals. What I've heard you talk about, and I'd love for you to explain a little further with our audience, the nuance around this. As you think about being of service, how do you think about balancing your stakeholder groups? The company, the workers, the community, the customers, the broader social good. That's complicated, but would love to hear your perspectives on it.
Yeah. I'll start out with the first part, and I blatantly stole this from the US Navy, so I've got to give credit where credit's due. In the Navy, we talk about what are the three important things. It's the ship, the shipmate, and the self. And you take care of those things in that order. I have a question for you and Jess. What do you think the number one threat to a Navy ship is when it's out on the ocean?
It sinks.
It sinks. Okay, what could make it sink?
A threat of some sort, running out of power or hit with a torpedo.
Yeah, maybe. Jess, any other ideas?
I mean, outside of what Andrew mentioned, I imagine in any sort of like military or protective forces, it's like misalignment. Like people are doing things that aren't in coordination with each other.
Yeah, that's probably the best answer I've gotten to that question. I'll be a little more precise in it. The number one threat to a Navy ship on the ocean is fire. Not a torpedo, not enemies, not helicopters or missiles or bombs, it's fire. And because you think about this really complex thing that's out on the ocean that has lots of wires and lots of explosive stuff on it, a spark can happen. And all of a sudden you've got a fire on your ship. So everybody in the Navy, every single person, officers to enlisted, we're all taught the first day of whether it's officer candidate school, boot camp, you name it, to fight a fire and to put a fire out. The first thing we got to do is take care of the ship. Because when we take care of the ship, we all get home safely. Or generally speaking, we all get home safely. So you take care of the ship first, and you protect it from dangers. Obviously, missiles, et cetera. That's what radar and counteroffensive measures are for, but also internal things, fire. And Jess, you put your finger on it, misalignment, right? If I look across and I'm like, oh, it's a fire over there. If I'm closest to the fire, I need to put it out. That's what I'm going to take care of first. Then my shipmate, my colleague, and third and last, I'm going to think about myself. So ship, shipmate, and self. I would translate that in the corporate sense to company first. And in that, I also mean customer. A for-profit organization, we are meant to support our customers. So company and customer first, team second, and self last. I think that's one of the primary ways, Andrew, to answer your question a bit, to orient yourself to service is like, what's the superordinate thing that I should be looking after right now? And I place organizational health at the top of that pyramid, because without the organization, without the ship, we don't go home safely. If I'm not looking after someone before I'm looking after myself, then guess what? Nobody has my back. And I've constantly got to be looking after myself in an organization. My cortisol levels are through the roof. I'm in my reptilian brain, right? My IQ is functionally lower because I'm under threat. When you have an organization, a culture that says someone's got my back and I have theirs, and all of us are working on taking care of the ship and the company, guess what? I'm able to operate with my highest IQ. Now, on a personal level, that's not super high. So I need all the help I can get. That I can't be feeling like I'm under threat constantly in an organization. I need to know that people have my back and we're all focused on one thing. So I'd say, Andrew, that's the first step of being of service, is orienting myself, at least on a personal level, to where is my focus. In the people business, I'll put it on a continuum. Most of us in our roles in organizations as teams, we are seen somewhere along the line of as one, a necessary evil, two, a critical enabler, or three, a trusted advisor. So it goes along this continuum. And if you think back, kind of back in the day, personnel teams, which heaven love the United States Navy, they still call HR the personnel department. Personnel teams, we were seen, I think, in many organizations as a necessary evil. It's like, only give me as much HR as I absolutely have to have and no more. I'll call them, don't call me. We then came along an evolution where I think the people function is seen largely now as a critical enabler. It is part and parcel of organizations. It is one of the roles that gets filled in the first, number of hires in a company. And in some organizations and some teams and some companies, we've evolved that even further to now be seen as a trusted advisor. And a trusted advisor goes like this. Hey, Jess isn't in the room yet. We can't start this meeting until she's here. Versus the critical enabler where it's, let's make this decision and then we'll call David in to make sure that it's aligned and compliant and we can action it. Or on the far end of the necessary evil, it's like, oh, please don't call the HR team until we absolutely have to. I think most of us have worked hard to evolve ourselves out of that space. I think we're at least in the critical enabler mode now. But how do we move from critical enabler to trusted advisor? And that comes back to A, making sure we're oriented in the right way, but B, do we speak the language of the business? And I think if I have some constructive feedback for myself and my own career and my own journey, I can always do more to speak more the language of the business, to make sure that I'm not running HR for HR's sake, that we're not doing the people business for our own organizational attributes, that we're here for the business. We got to speak the language of the business to be able to do that. So that's how, Andrew, I think, we go along that journey to make sure that we're of service by orienting ourselves first and then being really thoughtful about how are we showing up and how are we delivering value inside the organization.
In practice with your teams, what does that look like when they are being a business enabler versus being more supportive?
I'll give you two answers to that, Jess. One, this was a story from Salesforce days. The whole company had to learn the company pitch. And every year we'd roll out the pitch and it was, a 5-10 slide deck. And it was kind of the way we're talking about the company now this year. Now, I am not inside of Salesforce anymore. I can imagine they're probably doing that every month now or once a week, just with the pace of change. But we all had to learn it once a year. And the people team had to learn our company pitch, and I certified all of them. And then I went to one of my clients, her name was Kim, and I said, Kim, I want you to certify me on the company pitch. And I pulled up the deck. And she said, well, that's not the pitch, that's the sales deck. And I said, exactly. She said, you want to learn the sales deck? I said, yep. And I said, if I'm going to be your HR business partner leader, I need to make sure that you know that I know what you do all day. And she goes, are you sure about this? I said, yes. So she says, okay. So I studied and I studied and I studied, and I went and gave her the pitch. And Jess, she handed me my hat. She's like, nope, you missed this. You failed on that one. You missed this part. You misarticulated that. You misrepresented that. You mentioned our competitors 3 times. We don't ever do that. Just literally read me the riot act, and I deserved it. And I went back and I studied again. And I honed it and I got better. And the second time I went back, she said, okay, you passed. Let's be clear, not flying colors, but you passed. And I appreciated her candor there and also the time she invested. But what that let her know was that I cared so much about being of service to her in the sales function that I wanted to be certified at the level that she held her team accountable. I think that's fundamental to how we show up to our clients, that they know that we know what they do and we're speaking their language. We're putting it in their terms versus in our own. So that's kind of one story. The second one, I'll fast forward all the way to this past our Q3, Q4 last year, call it October, November. The Illumio people team, all of us have taken a big step into the agentic world. And so I challenged our people team. I said, by November, and I said this like October, September, I said, each of us will have an agent that we've named, and we're a Microsoft shop, so a Microsoft Copilot agent, and you have to name it, and you have to give it a task that it does for you. And the name has to be cheeky. And they said, what? I said, I am the arbiter of cheekiness. It has to be a fun name. But I said, look, fast forward a year or two from now, if we fail to get on this train in the right seats and the right cars, Andrew, our CEO and our founder, is going to bring some consulting firm in, probably like one of the ones I used to work for, and they're going to tell us how to use AI to do HR. And I said, I don't want that. I don't think you want that either. I think all of us want to be driving this thing. So let's go after it ourselves. And I'm proud to share right now, per capita, the people team at Illumio consumes more AI tokens than anybody else in the company.
Oh, that's impressive.
So to the point now where some of our team members are actually being told by Copilot, you've exceeded your capacity for today. Come back tomorrow with your research projects. So we are banging this thing like a screen door. This is the direction this is all going. And it's not just for salespeople doing prospecting. It's not just for computer scientists and software engineers, writing code and using agents to write code. This is for everybody in the business using these technologies to accelerate our ability to drive value. Those are two kind of examples. One, much more basic about, do you speak the language of the business? Do your clients know that you're in the business with them? And then the second is, are you skating to where the puck is going? Are you looking over the horizon and saying, that's where we're going? I want us to get there either at the same time as the company, or better yet, even ahead of the company.
Yeah, I love the first example on that. It's highlighting care about what your business leader cares about, right?
Yeah.
Understand the viewpoint that they are coming from. The second example, I love that you're starting to talk about AI. I was actually at an AI hackathon for people leaders just yesterday.
Yeah.
You're using the word cheeky. I believe it was Ben Hatch from LinkedIn who said the magical word to use with your AI prompts is whimsical, like make this more whimsical. And it suddenly makes it more fun as well. I wonder, how do you think about the guidance you give your team on what or how to build? And one of the biggest questions I hear right now is, what do I build versus buy, right? Like what's still in my HR tech stack that I'm going to renew for maybe one more year because everybody's like scared about multiple year renewals at the moment. But like, what are you keeping and what are you encouraging or experimenting with it being built via AI?
Yeah, Jess, if I had a definitive answer to that, I would be like on a for-profit speaking tour right now, making loads of consulting money, which I am not, and I do not have those magic beans. I'll tell you, what I've asked the team to do is to become proficient in AI in the way that it matters for your job. And that not only have you named your agent, but you're going to decide how it's going to help you versus have a vendor tell you how to use AI. Because that's using it in the way that they've defined it, that, no surprise and no harm, no foul on making money, but it's going to make them money. They're going to grow their business. They're going to execute their land and expand operations because they're going to tell you how you're supposed to use it. I would much rather have original thought coming from the teams saying, I've defined the use cases. Now let me decide whether I'm going to, and I'll add one more acronym there, ABC. Am I going to adopt something that somebody else has already built? Am I going to buy a tool or am I going to create it from scratch? That's where I think our teams need to be, is to define first, what is it they're trying to do? What can they accelerate? I had somebody the other day, I'd do skip levels a couple times a year. So I talked to everybody on the team directly for a little while. And one of my colleagues asked me, she said, point blank, she said, is my job going away? And I said, your job as you know it today is going to shift massively. So if you define that as going away, then perhaps. However, what I think that means is that if you were able to do 1x work in the past years, you're now going to be required to do 1.5 or 2 or 3 or 4x. I don't know if it's quite 10x. We talk a lot about the 10x engineer, but it's certainly going to be a 2 or 3 factor. That what we have been able to do to date, we should be able to do at least 150+% of that work. And oh, by the way, the work that we did is no longer going to be the work that we're going to do going forward. The things we can automate, the things we can script, things we can use an agent to do, that's going to change. So yeah, I mean, our jobs are going away. The people are not, that we're still going to have humans in the organization. We're just going to have them doing much different things than they were doing previously. And all love for my vendors, they're not going to be the ones to tell me how to run the shop. If they want to, they can come do my job and maybe I'll go do theirs. I'll go sell software. But I want to be the driver on that. I want our people in the team to be the driver of that, to define it clearly of what do their customers, what do their clients need, and then how are we going to use the technologies to do that. I will give a lot of kudos to a lot of these vendor teams out there. I won't name any of them because I'll certainly forget someone and I wouldn't want to do that. They're innovating and ideating quickly. They're doing a great job. Some of them are doing less of a great job, and some of them below those, and this is where the caveat is to my HR colleagues, and you all have probably run across this, is some of the vendors are coming to us and saying, okay, here's the core product. If you want to use AI with our product, here's the upsell. And I said this recently, I said, are you kidding me right now? And the AE went, what do you mean? I said, you're going to charge me to use a technology that every one of your competitors is layering into their tool automatically, because that's the new world. So you charging me for something that is now table stakes inside of the tool is not acceptable. So please go spin again. I'm not a buyer for that one. The other one, though, it's a little more pernicious. Some of the vendors are not yet quoting us the token cost to use the AI in the tool. The actual uplift, call it a 3% annual uplift in price, fine, but they're going to let us use it for a while, and then they're going to say, oh, and here's the upsell because of the tokens you're using. This ain't no free lunch, folks. So I'm asking the question earlier about let's talk to me about the token utilization. And the folks who are saying to me, well, we don't know yet. I'm saying, that's great. Well, we're going to put some protection in for me on this contract that you're not going to come and hit me with an X $1,000 bill a year from now because I'm using tokens. I know it costs money. I'm willing to pay for it, but let's bound this a little bit so that you and I are sharing in the risk. Because right now I think they're just opening the doors up and saying, go eat at the buffet. And then you walk out of the restaurant and they actually put you as a human on the scale. They're like, oh, well, David, you ate 3 pounds of dim sum. Now you have to pay me $200. I'm like, well, if I had known that, I would have had a little bit more celery and a little less pork. I would have eaten lighter foods to fill me up. I don't know if it's intentionally pernicious, but it's out there and it's happening. And they're not telling us about it, but I'm sure when the bill comes, we're going to know.
David, I love that we're digging deeper into artificial intelligence and our workflows and how it is becoming more and more a part of our work. I'd like to frame this again in the context of this podcast as a whole. People Leader Accelerator is largely intended to help our listeners accelerate their careers, grow in their careers as HR professionals. Certainly AI fluency is part of that. Certainly speaking the language of business is part of that. As we think about this audience of mid-level, earlier in their career than the three of us are, HR pros, I'd love to get your take and your advice on how HR professionals can be more effective and grow and accelerate. You've offered such wonderful frameworks. I'm wondering if we can't illuminate a few for the audience along the way.
I think the number one tool in our toolkits, regardless of the phase of our career, is curiosity. And I'm borrowing a page from my executive coach. I was struggling with something in the business, and her counsel to me, her name is Anita. Anita said to me, David, when you're furious, get curious. I wasn't necessarily furious, but I was befuddled about something. I was kind of wrestling with it. And she said, I'm going to challenge you to be more curious right now. And you think I've been doing this, I don't know, 26 years now, I guess, good gravy. You'd think I would already know that. I'm not perfect at my curiosity. It is the number one tool that any of us can access that doesn't cost anything. It doesn't require a degree. It doesn't have any number of years of experience or seniority or title. The most curious person in the room is probably the one that's going to find things the fastest. I was preparing for a client meeting, this is years ago, and my mentor, I went and gave him my pitch for the client before I went into the room. And I said, so what do you think? And he goes, you're going to fail. I said, I'm sorry, that's not the words of encouragement I'm looking for right now, sir. And he goes, yeah, you're going to fail. And I said, please tell me more. What's going to make me fail? And he said, you're trying to be the smartest person in the room. He said, don't try and do that. First of all, you never know who else is in the room. And you're going to lead with your own point of view versus your own questions. And so what he was telling me, using different words, was go be curious. Don't try and be the smartest person in the room. Because especially at the pace that we're moving right now, as we've been talking about, none of us can be. But we can strive to be the best question asker, the most thoughtful and the most curious person in the room, to say, I wonder, I'm curious about that. I'm puzzling on that. I want to think on that some more. I'd love to learn more about. Those are really powerful words and tools to use in our careers. And when you're in a room as an early or mid-career professional and you're with senior people and you pipe up and you say, I'm really curious about that. I'd love to learn more about that. And I wonder how ... That leader's going to go, watch that one, because our job as senior leaders is professionally curious. Now, sometimes we frame that in more direct words, but we're probing parts of the business, parts of the market, trying to understand what's going on in the industry, in our space, in our company, that we're supposed to be looking in the dark corners. We're not supposed to be using the tried and true tread paths to say, well, last time I did A, then B, then C. Those days are well long gone. Anyone can access that executive talent inside of themselves, regardless of where they are in their career. The other one that I'll say is this, and this is something I kind of developed myself years ago. If you're ever working with a leader, especially now, I suppose, who is up in front of the room with the team and goes, I've got this all figured out, find the closest exit and run out the door. Because any leader who professes to have this is dead wrong. None of us has this. All of us are referencing things that we've worked on before, our own point of view, our own frame of reference, and we're trying to work through it. And if you're working for a leader who shows up in that way, they're probably not going to be the leader who's going to encourage you to be curious because they have a fixed mindset, a fixed worldview. This is not a learning leader. It's not a learning organization possibly you're part of. So just pressure test that a little bit, I would just say, to someone who's early and mid-career of, are you working with the right people? Are you surrounding yourself with the right people who have an orientation towards possibility and who operate from a place of curiosity and open inquiry? Because that's what not only our companies need, our organizations need, but the world needs right now, especially at this pace of change.
One thing that Andrew and I were thinking about is, what is something that like HR leaders start to do differently when they're about a decade into their career, right? Like they've got sort of those early years figured out, some of these initial lessons, but as they're really trying to transition, maybe call it 8 to 15 years into their career, what are some of the things that you would advise someone today or encourage that they start to just think about behaviorally differently than maybe that served them well in the beginning and it starts to shift?
The first one is to really get super crystal clear as early as we can in our careers about what gets us up in the morning. What do I believe? What are my personal values? I talk to a lot of folks who reach out and they say, you know, can you mentor me or just give me some counsel or whatever? And when I talk to them, and some of them are mid-career professionals, I kind of start probing, like, do you really know your purpose? Have you spent time, doing the hard work? Have you paid the freight inside your own heart and mind about what you're about? And really defining that as early on as possible. And I know when we're early in career, we may not know that quite yet, but there comes a point when you say, okay, let me write this down. Like, take a moment, write those things down. What is my purpose? The second one is, by the time you're 8-10 years into our careers, we kind of have a sense of, we know what we know. We're pretty good at something, and people are going to hire us to do that thing. I think it's super important for the organizations and the leaders who hire us to go do that thing, that we also acknowledge that the thing that I know and the way that I do that thing is maybe not the thing to do that way forever and ever. So we've got to unlearn what we have already learned. Now, what we do know is we have these intellectual framework underpinnings of learning how to learn that we spent the first part of our career in our schooling doing. That's good. That's the framework, the architecture we need. But the content itself sometimes needs to be unlearned in order to relearn it. So just because they hired you to do something in a certain way may not actually be what that organization needs, or it may not be what that organization needs a year from now. And those of us who fail to adapt quickly are generally the ones who will probably be replaced with somebody who has or who does or who can. Be ready to unlearn what you think you know.
When you start in a role, a new people leader role, like when you started at Illumio, what are the things that you actively try to unlearn from your past role as you're starting in a new one?
I've had the benefit of working with, I think, 4 or 5 founder CEOs now. And there's a chance for those of us in the business with any client to say, oh, okay, this is client type X or this is client flavor A. And so I'll do these things with that client because they kind of fit in this model. Because humans are humans, whatever we think we know about somebody or the judgments we make in the first X amount of time we work with them oftentimes reveal themselves to be different or untrue over the fullness of time, either because we were wrong or that person has evolved or changed. And so being open to that, of saying what I think I know about this client or this leader may evolve. It takes a lot of courage to do this, and I'm not perfect at it yet by any stretch, but it's actually to verbalize that, to articulate it and say, here's what I think I know about who you are, what you want, how you want me to be. Let me just gut check that real quick. Sometimes they may say, nope, you're on track and that's great. But sometimes they may say, no, that's not it. I came up with a little phrase a while back. There are unarticulated expectations that we have of each other, of ourselves. And those unarticulated expectations are seeds in the garden of discontent. And whenever we have these unarticulated expectations, we're planting those seeds. And all of a sudden we've got this garden of discontent that's grown up around us. And we're like, how did this happen? Because I had an unarticulated expectation, or someone had one of me that I never exposed. And so I think no matter how long we are in our careers or how many leaders we get to work with or how many CEOs we serve, making sure that neither we nor they have unarticulated expectations. And if you have a leader who is unwilling to articulate those, I'll know it when I see it, Jenkins. Wrong answer. Jenkins is not here to try and bring you lots of different desserts on the table and then you tell me when I get the right one, because I'm just going to waste a lot of time in the kitchen. Let's get real clear with each other about what those expectations are, or develop a framework to explore them and define them. If we don't know them yet, that's okay, but let's work together on what those are so that we're not missing each other in the night. And then all of a sudden, a year from now, we look at each other and we're like, are you on my agenda? Am I on your agenda? through nothing other than just we haven't asked.
There's a tension potentially to point out for the benefit of our audience, where there's a tendency for HR leaders to ask their CEO, their business leader, the founder that they work for, how can I help? What do you want me and my team to do for you? And I've said pretty publicly in kind of a spicy way that often, maybe even usually, our CEOs and founders don't know what good looks like from HR. Like it's our job to identify, to understand the situation enough to figure out how we can contribute rather than asking for the detailed roadmap and the task list. How would you break down that balance between articulating the expectations from the leader, but at the same time, identifying your own priorities and roadmap to add value?
Simply put, start with the customer. What is the customer that your company or organization serves, or the stakeholder or the shareholder or the constituent in public service? Who is that customer? What do they need? And then how does your organization serve that customer from a product to service perspective? And how's the company doing at serving that customer? Unpacking that one step further down the chain, how are we doing as an organization? How are we doing as a people function supporting the organization's ability to deliver to that customer? Most of the time, what we'll find in there is that's where we can be of service in the company, is if it's taking us too long to respond to customer inquiries, if our product roadmap is misaligned with customer expectations, if our deal cycle is too long, if our product market fit is not there, there's a place where people teams can help within that. And that's the part, Andrew, to your question, we take to the CEO or to the client and we say, hey, based upon the last webinar we did, or our last earnings report, or the last analyst report I read about us, this is something that we're working on. And I heard that in the all hands meeting. And I'm curious if something doing this inside the organization would help get us closer to delivering for that with the customer. You frame the question that way, the lights are going to go, boop, 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 the fireworks will start going off. The client's going to go, holy guacamole, you are on my agenda. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm here to be of support to you in the business. And this is what I'm hearing. Now, we may not have it perfectly right. They may say, yes, and I want to see it this way, or color it purple, or make the button blue. Fine. At the same time, though, we're coming at the business on their terms, anchoring ourselves in what's right for the company and the customer, versus coming to it with my dusty old binder, my old CEO Greg used to say, of like the HR playbook. Or tab 3 says the following. Like, nobody wants tab 3. We got to make a whole new binder. And we do that by looking at what does a company do for the customer.
Such a great learning too, just in how to build trust. I feel like, especially coming from a consulting background that we both share, is how to build trust quickly is I'm not self-interested, but I am looking out for the other. And I feel like that has come throughout this conversation. It is time for our wrap-up set of accelerator round questions. The first of which is around learning resources. So PLA loves high leverage learning. We love to learn from where our guests are learning from. And so if you could recommend 2 resources, whether books, newsletters, other people, to an emerging people leader, what 2 sources would make the cut for you?
This may be kind of like a duh, but we miss the trick more than not, is immersing ourselves every day in the news of the business world, making sure that we are oriented to what's going on in the broader world around us. So on your way into the office, on your commute, or on your treadmill, or whatever you do to get ready for the day, making sure that there is a feed from a Bloomberg, a Wall Street Journal, an NPR, a CNBC, et cetera, somewhere on your consciousness that you're consuming, even if it's only 5 to 10 minutes of top headline news, both globally and in the business world. There will be a reference at some point to something in a meeting that if you're the only person going, what are they talking about? The credibility is shot because you're just not paying attention to what the rest of our clients are paying attention to. Again, sounds like low-hanging fruit, but swap out the time that I spend on TikTok, for another 5 minutes of Bloomberg, and it'll probably serve me pretty well. And that's advice I can probably take myself. Number 2, Notebook LM. I love that tool. I drop things in there all the time. When I see something complex, whether it's a white paper or something that I'm looking at out in the trades, I'll drop it in Notebook LM, have it create a podcast for me, and it drops into like a 15-minute podcast, and I'll listen to that as I'm working out or something in the morning, or walking to board a plane, to get myself smart on that. And the technology just keeps getting better, but that's a super strong resource. It's free in the Google architecture, which I love. So
Amazing. You've given us so much advice for people who are in their HR careers, but if you had one sentence of advice that you would share with someone around how to accelerate a successful HR career in today's environment, what would you share?
I think it comes back to what we were talking about around defining for yourself really clearly what you're about. I don't know when the good Lord's going to take me from this earth. I don't know when my breath is my last breath. What I do know is I'm trying to build a career and a life that is oriented around what I believe I was put here to do. And the time that we can all spend on defining that and refining that and making sure that when we look in the mirror in that quiet moment, the person looking back at us is proud of us, that's what we should do. Because you can fool the whole world a lot of the time, but in your quiet moments in your own heart, in your own mind, you can't fool yourself. You know if you're not living the life you're meant to live. And I know not everybody has the privilege and the ability to do exactly that, but I think each of us in small ways can orient ourselves that way. But first, we've got to define it. We've got to be clear with ourselves and be honest with ourselves about that. And I think that'll put us on the right path.
Last but not least, how can our listeners connect with you?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn in terms of consumption that way and happy to connect there. And follow me, I'll follow you back, and let's learn from each other.
Love it. David, really appreciate your time, your willingness to share your personal stories and advice for our listeners. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Andrew, it's my pleasure. And Jess, thanks again. Great being with you guys. And thanks for everything you're doing to help advance the dialogue out with the PLA community. This is an amazing group of leaders who are learning from and teaching each other mutually. And I just love what you all are doing out in the industry. So thanks for having me on and appreciate the time.